The GPU market has never been so chaotic. These past 5 or 6 years, we've seen AMD and Nvidia release a barrage of products to gamers. However, availability, demand, and corporate profit motives have completely obliterated consumer enthusiasm. Consumers feel a bit betrayed by what has been pitched to us as the next best thing, while asking us to pay astronomical prices for the same products as before. In our eyes, what was once a mid-range GPU is now being upsold as a high-end card. But is this the right perspective? Today, it's time for an intervention for both Nvidia and gamers. Now guys, this video is a bit longer than we usually do here on the channel, but for this particular topic, I think it's worth the watch to go into the finer detail when it comes to performance, pricing, as well as value. For those of you that are looking for a little bit of the TLDR, here's the timestamp and I'll catch you guys on the other end. But for those of you that want to know a little bit more nuance when it comes to Nvidia's pricing and performance, we are going to get to the bottom of this.
What's going on?
Enough with the charts.
And the graphs.
Really, any visual representation of data.
A projection chart. And look, huge spike in interest coming. And this isn't just some dead cat bounce. This is big sustainable growth over the long term.
You're a big sustainable growth.
Before we start, I am by no means defending Nvidia's pricing strategies. Personally, Nvidia makes high-quality products, but they charge more than the competition for that privilege. Pricing is a tricky business, so let's see how Nvidia has historically suggested their pricing from the 1000 series up to today. Typically, Nvidia classes mainstream cards as their 60 series, mid-range as their 70 series, and high-end with their 80 series. Of course, between the generations and depending on what competition can muster, Nvidia creates new variants like the Ti, the Super, and even better flagships with the 90 series. With the 1000 generation, the 80 series held an MSRP of $600, which isn't cheap even by today's standards. Going into their flagship, you'll need to spend an additional $100 for that extra performance. With the introduction of the RTX 2000 generation, Nvidia made many changes to its lineup, including new hardware and software features to further improve its product. Today, we look at DLSS and ray tracing as generation-defining features. Still, back in 2018, these RTX pillars needed to be established. As such, Nvidia increased their 80 series by $100 and their flagship by a massive $300. As for the low end, the mainstream 60 series saw a $50 bump, and the mid-range 70 series encountered a stark $120 increase. Given the lackluster release and rollout of DLSS and ray tracing at that time, most of the community saw this as a money grab, and RTX 2000 rolled into a rocky launch. We all remember Just Buy It. As the RTX 2000 generation continued to mature with DLSS 2 and more RTX support, Nvidia worked hard with the RTX 3000 series. With massive backlash and pricing from the 2000 series, Nvidia did not raise the price for the 60, 70, or even 80 class hardware. In fact, the mainstream RTX 3060 launched with a $20 discount. However, as generous as that might appear, people that wanted the flagship would have to pay for that privilege, with the RTX 3090 costing $500 more than its predecessor. Wow! Now the 3000 series is fascinating because this is when AMD started to compete with Nvidia in the mid to high-end space. As such, several Ti variants were introduced to fill the holes in the portfolio, but also begin what I believe is a performance reclassification of its lineup. Now here we are in 2023. The RTX 4000 series has launched and we've only seen Nvidia's top tier cards. The RTX 4090 leads the pack with a staggering $1,600 price tag, followed closely by the RTX 4080, increasing the 80 series cost by a staggering $500. The RTX 4070 Ti, previously listed as the RTX 4080 12GB, bumps up the 70 Ti class cards from $200 from its predecessor. It would appear that Nvidia is intentionally shifting its product stack towards the high end, with new features like DLS3 and superior RT and rasterization performance. But this is all MSRP. As much as Nvidia wants to control what it sells its cards for, the market ultimately dictates what customers have to pay. In 2020, the world began its conflict with COVID-19. Supply chain restrictions and surging demand for personal computers caused PC hardware costs to skyrocket. Compounding this is another wave of Ethereum mining that didn't help the availability in the slightest. Now, I don't have data available from 2020, but this era continued well through 2021 and into 22, of which we have comprehensive historical data. For the GTX 1000 generation in October of 21, sales prices for used graphics cards were close to MSRP for the 80 and flagship cards. That 5-year-old card maintained its value due to its superb performance. And with the increased interest in 1440p and 4K gaming, that generation's flagship also maintains value in 21. But in 2022, availability started to increase, and the demand decreased with a better understanding and mitigation of the pandemic and the crypto crash. As such, the GPU market is crashing, and both GTX cards are well below their MSRP. And as it should, that card is almost as old as my kids. So, RTX 2000. This is where the pricing began to see some issues, and in 2018, pricing was high, but not too outrageous. But with COVID and the crypto boom, RTX 2000 card prices nearly doubled into 21, even for the lowest end of SKUs. Come October of 22, prices cratered and many GPUs could be bought for less than half of their MSRP. This type of market correction is what we expect to see, given the relative performance against current and upcoming GPUs from Nvidia. RTX 3000 is where the issue becomes abundantly clear to gamers and the market. The market inflated any GPU considered usable with absurd pricing for any in-stock cards, including the RTX 3060 for $700 in October of 21. And as much as we like to complain about this absurdity, the market is beginning to correct itself. Most mainstream and mid-range cards sell near or around their suggested retail price. And more interestingly, the high-end is currently still in correction mode, thanks partly to the announcement and release of new and high-end cards from AMD and Nvidia. Now, in present-day 23, let's talk about that RTX 4000 series. As I mentioned earlier, we only see the top-tier SKUs from Nvidia at this point. As of this recording, you can pick up an RTX 4090 for about $1,720. That's about $120 more than their MSRP and $220 more than the previous RTX 3090. The RTX 4080 is priced more comparable to an RTX 3080 Ti, which is a stark contrast to previous 80 series releases. They can be picked up for about $1,270 or $70 more than MSRP. Comparatively, that's $370 more expensive than an RTX 3080 Ti, or $530 more than its predecessor. The RTX 4070 Ti is in an interesting place, coming in at $900 as of this recording, or $100 more than MSRP. Compared to its predecessor, that's around $325 more. With all the pricing data, it's abundantly clear that the market has had a wild ride over these past 5 years. But in that time, there are 3 key takeaways for consumers regarding pricing. First and most important, the market will dictate pricing, not Nvidia. As we saw throughout the generations when under extreme external pressure, pricing will increase proportionally to what the market deems important. Second, mainstream and mid-range GPUs are typically where the value is, not in the high end. The obvious Turk is obvious, but the data bears this out. Under normal market conditions, these cards have much more competition across the board, so seeing cross-generational pricing comparison is apparent. The GTX 1080, RTX 2070 Super, and the RTX 3060 are all around $300 in price, which gives gamers options, which is always a good thing. Last, high-end devices will always be poor value. When selling the best of the best, companies will always charge what they think is appropriate for that privilege. See the RTX 3090. That flagship remained uncontested for a long time and maintained that price point accordingly. Even with the 3090 Ti, though short-lived, it remained a coveted piece of high-end kit that justifies its price even today. Regardless of Nvidia's pricing over the years, one thing has remained consistent. Their products perform well in their respective hierarchy. Nvidia's generational improvement targets have been well known across the industry. Let's set a baseline and see if that pans out with real performance. First, let's look at 3D Mark TimeSpy. It's not representative of actual game performance, but it is accurate enough to establish a performance hierarchy. When it comes to Nvidia's 80 series cards, they are typically considered to be high-end and set the stage for their flagships to be released. As Nvidia gears up for a new generation of cards, they typically target their mainstream models, the 60 series, to match this performance level. For example, moving from the 2016 juggernaut, the GTX 1080, to the modest RTX 2060, Nvidia can match this performance level. Next are the flagships. Nvidia slaps a bunch of names on them like the Ti, the Super, or even their new tier of the 90 series. Still, they typically perform much better than their 80 class brothers. As with mainstream cards, Nvidia aims to target that performance level with their mid-range SKUs, the 70 series. Again, moving from the 1000 to 2000 series, the RTX 2070 Super surpasses the GTX 1080 Ti. This upgrade path is consistent across the generations of GPUs, following suit with the RTX 2080 and 2080 Ti. With the RTX 4000 generation, Nvidia delivers yet again, with their upper mid-range RTX 4070 Ti surpassing the previous flagship, the 3090 Ti, an impressive feat, especially in this class of hardware. 3D Mark results are one thing, but how does that pan out in real games? Despite my passion for this sort of analysis, I just don't have access to hardly any of these cards today. As a 6,000 subscriber Andy, companies just don't see the value in sending me thousands of dollars worth of GPUs to perform this level of analysis. However, if you like what you're seeing so far, hit the subscribe button and like the video. I love doing this work and can only get there with your help. In the meantime, I've pulled two critical videos from Hardware Unboxed to look at today. Recently, they performed a massive multi-GPU benchmark covering Modern Warfare 2 at various resolutions and presets. For this analysis, I'm focusing primarily on 4K results and basic settings to give each card the best chance of performing well. Unfortunately, that video predates the 4080 and 4070 Ti, so I'm going to be leaning on the 4070 Ti review for that analysis. Of course, Hardware Unboxed doesn't make it easy, and they use two different setups for each video. However, we can still glean some important metrics to develop a concise story. Let's go bottom up. The GTX 1080 is beaten by the RTX 2060 and 2060 Super. The 1080 Ti is beaten by the 2070 Super. The 2080 is beaten by the 3060 Ti. And even with the 2080 Ti, it is beaten by the 3070 Ti. And if we pivot over to the other dataset, the RTX 3090 Ti is beaten, of course, by the RTX 4070 Ti. Clearly, this game is not indicative of all the games that could have been tested. Still, the TimeSpy results are at least useful for this comparison. And to take a second and look at the overall 4K results from the 4070 Ti review, that card is only 3% short of tying the previous generation flagship. Of course, I'd love to see all these GPUs included in this comparison chart, but I can only work with what I've got. Now for the ultimate question, is Nvidia worth it these days? Are any of the RTX 4000 generation cards worth the price tag? Value is always relative to the user and the comparison, so let's do just that. Using the pricing comparisons from earlier in the video and the performance from this last segment, I've constructed a new metric for our comparison today, performance per dollar. This metric is calculated similarly to how AMD calculates performance per watt improvement, making it very straightforward to compare a known card against a variety of sample cards. Using the pricing hierarchy from before, I'll compare every card against the 1080, the 2070, and 3070. From you guys' comments in my community tab, it sounds like those cards are the best balance in terms of price versus performance. First up is the GTX 1080. In terms of MSRP, it's easy to see extra value from the high-tier cards because newer cards perform better than older cards. Duh. And the price increase just isn't that much. For example, the RTX 2070 performs 19% better than the 1080 while costing 17% less. In the same respect, the RTX 2070 Super is a much more valuable option, costing the exact same price, but bumping performance compared to the GTX 1080 by 34%. But moving into the chaos of October 21, very few cards are considered to be of value. Given the price of the card relative to the performance of the card, it's just underwater. That same 2070 now costs 43% more than the 1080 at the exact time, disqualifying it from bargain status. Take a look at the 4000 generation. At current pricing, they maintain a better price to performance than any other card on the market. That's a perspective you didn't think you'd be seeing today. As time progresses and the GPU market stabilizes, the 2000 series becomes a good value option for an upgrade to the 1080, while both the 3000 and 4000 generation are cost prohibitive. This makes sense given the market has stabilized to reflect the 1080's performance equal to about $250. At over 3 times the cost, the 4070 Ti is just not able to swing the difference. However, you could account for DLSS, RT, and other RTX features to compensate, but I won't use that for this conversation. Now that we know the price and performance, let's condense it a bit to this new performance per dollar metric. Values above 100% mean that the performance improvement is larger than the cost increase. Clearly, nearly every card at MSRP is better than the 1080, with the lower-end RTX 3000 series coming out way ahead due to its drastic performance improvements at the suggested prices. But once the market and costs got absurd, there's just no value cards anywhere. And as the market corrects itself to MSRP-ish levels, used RTX 2000 series cards begin to become a lucrative upgrade path. Granted, 4 years too late. So how about that 2070? It was marketed as a 1080 Ti replacement, so how does that value hold up over time? At suggested retail prices, RTX 3000 generation cards are a good upgrade path. At the same time, RTX 4000 series sees similar levels. As for the high-end upgrades like the 2080, 3080 Ti, the 9090 Ti, they all suffer from the Nvidia performance tax. But the RTX 4080 and 4090 perform well enough to justify the suggested price increase. As 21 comes around, the RTX 2000 series is hot in the market, making all relative price increases similar enough to their relative performance increase. Again, that RTX 4000 series, at those price levels, it makes excellent sense for an upgrade. Despite the GPU market recovery, the RTX 3000 and 4000 GPUs are just too expensive compared to the 2070 and 22 and now to justify an upgrade. Okay, boys and girls, RTX 3070 time. Can the 4000 series finally come out on top? I'll throw the MSRP and 2021 charts on the screen and hit pause if you want, but the October 22 data is more relevant today. Comparing the RTX 3070 to higher-end 3000 series cards, the value is clearly found in the lower end. For most people, the price premium for the 3080 and higher just isn't worth it. And the same can be had about the RTX 4000 series. Higher-end cards right now don't make sense for an upgrade. In the best case, the 4070 Ti is a linear upgrade in price to performance. And this same result pans out in Modern Warfare 2. If we remove the relative aspect of the metric and just do raw performance per dollar, the 4070 Ti performs at the same level as the RTX 3070. This performance per dollar metric is extremely helpful. Let me know down in the comments if this is something you'd like me to expand on a bit more in the future. We've dissected Nvidia's pricing over the past 5 years and the relative performance of 4 generations of cards so far. With data in hand, I've learned a few lessons along the way while posing some critical questions for both Nvidia and us gamers. Regarding high-end cards, value is relatively less important than raw performance. As much as we like to have cheaper cards, life is just never that fair. If someone wants the best of any experience, be prepared to pay the cost. For gamers, that represents 4K gaming at high refresh rates, luscious RT graphics at mid-range resolutions, or even those added features for content creation or smoother playability. Performance is easy to quantify, but these other aspects are just much more difficult. Next, as much as I love capitalism, sometimes it takes a while for the market to correct itself. As we saw in 21 and throughout the pandemic, pricing across the industry was pure chaos. As the world starts to get its head back on its shoulders, older cards have begun to correct themselves, and newer cards are starting to follow suit. Hopefully, as AMD and Nvidia begin announcing their upcoming mid-range cards, the market will continue to shift in the right direction. The last lesson I've learned, PC gaming is in a transitional space at the moment. As I've discussed in other videos here on the channel, 1080p and 1440p gaming are becoming a lot less relevant as selling points for these types of products. Back in the GTX 1080's day, 1440p seemed to be a sweet spot for the high-end gamers, but in a short 6 years, that has shifted to 4K. And for the mid-range gamer, there are plenty of cross-generation GPUs capable of high frame rates on the market. As mainstream gamers, 1080p is nearly achievable at decent quality settings and frame rates in the handheld devices. Within the next few years, I expect mid-range gamers to upgrade to 4K and mainstream users to begin to migrate to 1440p. Expecting our older generation's understanding of the market to translate into this new market segment is just setting ourselves up for failure. So I have to ask Nvidia the question, what is your intention for pricing going forward? Is the goal to reflect a product's relative performance or a price reflective of the market? For instance, the GTX 1080 to the 2060. The pricing goal was to achieve the same performance at almost half the cost. Should we expect the 4060 for $400 if that's the case, right? At $500, that's already above an RTX 3060 Ti. If AIB upscale is anywhere close to $600, that's instantly where a 4070 would historically be placed. The 3000 series prices are currently stabilizing, so anywhere above $425 would just seem like an unjustified price increase. Now for gamers, what price do you put on performance? For the GTX 1080 at MSRP in Modern Warfare 2, 4K at 44 FPS used to cost you $600. Today, 4K at 60 FPS can cost you between $380 and $260. At 380, you're talking about an RTX 3060, $300 gets you a 2070 Super, and $260 is the old flagship, the GTX 1080 Ti. At MSRP, those cards would cost you around $400, $500, and $700. What price would you expect from a brand new card to hit 4K 60 FPS in this title? Assuming the RTX 4060 comes close to the historical 3080's performance, is it reasonable to get 107 FPS at $400 in a title from an RTX 4060? Or on a broader scale, would you expect 4K 60 FPS on average from a $400 card? Currently, that performance costs you $580 in the market as we see it today. That's a 30% price cut from a 3070 Ti to right now. There are no gen-over-gen cards that get less than 30% unless prices hit MSRP levels. Expecting insane performance levels at insane cost points only sets you up for failure, and to think otherwise would be unwise. To me, I see the problem as twofold. Nvidia has increased performance to such a level that they've got to alleviate the situation somehow. expecting customers to pay $500 for a card that they could have picked up 2 years ago for $600, it's no longer a lucrative upgrade. And with the product classifications no longer lining up with their respective mainstream, mid-range, and high-end designators, customers will continue to feel cheated. From a pricing standpoint alone, the 4080 is priced as a 3080 Ti, and the 4070 Ti is priced above a 3080. By shifting these GPUs to higher-end SKU designators, gamers will be more accepting of a high-end price tag while leaving plenty of room in the mid-range for a true RTX 4070 to be closer to $500. As for gamers, we need to take a step back and look at what we want from a new GPU. Do we want high frame rate 4K gaming? Then you have to expect a high price. Suppose you want an average 4K 60 gaming experience. If that's the case, the market has yet to allow that to become a reality sub $500. As for lower end gaming with 1080p or 1440p panels, there are just few new products that you can pick up that balance your performance and your budget constraints. With the RTX 3000 series becoming end of life, Nvidia needs to give users access to this performance level. The 50 class would be an excellent place to expand on this, just like the GTX 1000 series did. Ultimately, Nvidia needs to adjust its product stack to account for the price relative to their performance targets, and if they can't, the 4070s and 4060s will remain on the shelf just like the 4080s and the 4070 Ti's. As for gamers, unless you're looking for high-end 4K gaming, expecting unrealistic pricing for unrealistic performance levels will set you up for failure. If 1440p is your resolution, the market is already correcting itself for a sweet spot of $450. If you're still rocking a 1080p panel, value can be had anywhere between $200 and $300. But if you're looking for an unbridled 4K gaming experience, the market still justifies a $600 entry point. Expecting less is a pipe dream. And that's my intervention for Nvidia as well as us gamers. I hope y'all found this information at least useful for kind of level setting your expectations when it comes to pricing and performance with the next generation of graphics cards. If you guys think I've missed anything, let me know down in the comments, and I like to respond and engage with you guys down there. As always, if you like tech memes, check me out over at Twitter @TheTurk, and always check out my community tab. I like to ask you guys what y'all want to see on the channel coming up next. I've got my A&Neo Geek coming in, hopefully from the Indiegogo campaign, so expect that review in a couple weeks, and we've got some other great content lined up as well. But thank you guys for sticking to the end of the video. I hope you've enjoyed it. We'll catch you guys in the next one.